Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 26th of October 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, and myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're joined by David Scott. I had to think there, sorry for that, David. David Scott, and David reporting from north of the border with Northern Exposure. And Exposure is a very good place to start, isn't it? Really?
Well, let's start with Philip Green, who was named yesterday as being the so-called wealthy businessman who has been naughty with various people and tried to cover it up with non-disclosure agreements. So this began on Wednesday when, at that point, an unnamed businessman went to court to get an injunction from the Daily Telegraph to stop them revealing his name. Now, this had initially failed in the High Court, and he had then taken it to the Appeals Court. And so the Appeals Court the judges there, the three judges, overturned the previous ruling on the grounds that all the victims had signed these non-disclosure agreements purely, with full understanding of what they were doing, and that took precedence over any right of freedom of the press. Well, this blew up yesterday because Peter Hain decided that he would name the person using parliamentary privilege in the House of Lords, and he said, "I feel it's my duty under parliamentary privilege to name Philip Green as the individual in question, given that the media have been subject to an injunction preventing publication of the full details of the story." Now, on Wednesday, Clive Coleman was speaking on the Today programme. We were listening to it on the car on the way in, and he was saying that, of course, these agreements were freely entered into, and that's probably why the High Court, or the Appeals Court, decided to uphold the injunction. But many people concerned that perhaps Philip Green, using his power and his influence to obtain an injunction. And when we were discussing this before the programme, Brian, you were drawing parallels with how councils are behaving with victims of sexual abuse.
Well, what councils have been doing, not only with victims of sexual abuse, is introducing gagging clauses. If there's been any form of whistleblowing and there's some form of settlement offered, it always comes with a gagging clause. This has been done throughout the country by local authorities. I find that wrong. I certainly find it wrong when councils are gagging survivors of abuse. Nottingham City Council is doing this at the moment, so there's been compensation payouts with a gagging order, and effectively what those gagging orders are doing is covering up criminal activity. Now, I don't know whether Mr. Green did or did not carry out an unlawful act, but since there were a number of people making complaints, we might assume that there's some truth to the story, something happened. And do the public have a right to know? I think they do. I take the point about the fact the court's made a decision, but what we seem to be getting is that if you have enough money and can engage legal teams of sufficient power, you can keep anything you do quiet. And I think that is wrong.
Let's welcome David Scott to the programme then. David, what were your thoughts on this?
Well, power and money. Who's got the most power and money? That would be the state. Now, Theresa May hit out at, quote, unethical use of non-disclosure agreements. But Theresa May set up the child abuse inquiry. Theresa May is now the head of the government. Theresa May is the head of the organisation which is most frequently using unethical non-disclosure agreements to keep unpalatable facts from the public. So that would be monumental hypocrisy.
Yeah, just briefly, do you have any thoughts about the timing of this?
Not especially. Where are you going with that, Mike?
Well, I'm just wondering why the Telegraph. I mean, because many of these types of cases have been known about for a very long time. Philip Green. You look at other people of a similar status in life as Philip Green, people that are sort of on top of large organisations as he was, and you go back through the media for 10, 20, 30 years and you find similar allegations time and time again over certain people. And so this is another case where I'm struggling to see that this wasn't known about or understood, but the Telegraph chose now to suddenly launch a 6-month investigation, and this has brought the issue of so-called freedom of the press back into the media. So I'm just wondering what both your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, why? What's my response? I really don't know, Mike, but I do find it just incredible that these wonderful journalists in the mainstream papers, with all the awards they've earned, they can't report on where these gagging orders are being used for people who've been abused, sexually abused, but they can suddenly make a big splash about this. So if I wanted to be really cynical, the government's under huge pressure over Brexit. We need something to take the public eye off Brexit. That's the game. That's the best I can do, I think. Okay,
well, let's move on to Brexit then, because the government has launched the Fisheries Bill. Now, of course, this is one of the big areas where we're repatriating powers, allegedly, taking control of our fisheries again. So the bill says it's going to create powers to build a sustainable, profitable UK fishing industry and deliver a green Brexit with new protections for a precious marine environment. So let's look at the 3 main points then. First of all, we have this: controlling access by ending current automatic rights for EU vessels to fish in UK waters. In future, access to fish in UK waters will be a matter for the UK to negotiate and will be decided on the terms. And we will decide on the terms. Now, this is the first oxymoron that I found here, because I'm not clear how the UK is going to make decisions when they're subject to negotiation with, assuming we do leave the European Union, with a foreign power. So this seems to be fraudulent straight away. Let's move on to the next one. Setting fishing opportunities by proposing powers to ensure that the UK can set its own fishing quota and days at sea, which it will negotiate with as an independent coastal state. So we're going to set our own fishing quota and days at sea, but we're not going to do that because it's going to be subject to negotiation. So I'm not clear how that works either. But anyway, maybe David will have some ideas in a second. And then we're going to protect the marine environment by ensuring fisheries management decisions are taken strategically for the benefit of the whole marine environment. The bill extends powers to the Marine Management Organisation and the devolved administrations to protect our seas. So we're going to negotiate with a foreign power post-Brexit about quotas and all this kind of stuff, but we're going to also impose various green policies on top of that. So, David, this gets very, very interesting. Just before I ask you to comment on this, let's just bring in Michael Gove and see what he said here. The new fisheries bill will allow us to create a sustainable, profitable fishing industry for all the UK. It will regenerate coastal communities, take back control of our waters, and through better conservation measures, allow our precious marine environment to thrive. So could you explain to me, David, how this takes back control of our waters?
Well, it takes it back to some extent to the politicians in Westminster. It doesn't take it back to the people. Certainly not to the fishermen. This is what they did.
Well, actually, I'm gonna take you up on that straight away, because it doesn't bring things back to the politicians in Westminster. It brings it back to negotiation with the EU once we start negotiating our future relationship. And of course, politicians in Westminster aren't necessarily going to get much of a say over that. That's going to be done by Mr. Robbins and his civil servant mandarins. And Theresa, well, the people that are pulling Theresa May's strings. So I'm not quite sure what Parliament actually input is going to have on that.
I didn't say Parliament. I said politicians, or at least political interests in London. Right now, but that's a long way from the people. That's a long way from the fishermen. Right now, there was a radical policy used in Iceland, where they actually handed over the management of the fishing grounds to the fishermen. Right now, all of the Green lobby was wringing its hands because, well, these greedy fishermen would just hoover the seas clean. But of course, this is nonsense, because the fishermen, having this heritable, valuable asset, immediately set about preserving it, and in fact reduced the quota. And fishermen obviously understand a few things about fish. I don't want to embarrass you here, Mike, but you have to have a male fish and a and a female fish, and they have to, they sort of swim out together, and there's a bit of texting goes on, and things have to happen before you have baby fish. And if you catch them before this happens, then you don't have baby fish. And fishermen understand these technicalities, and the Icelandic fishermen have made a fine job of running their fishing grounds. No sign of any movement like that here.
Yeah, if I may, excuse me, just to add a bit, it was the opening picture there which told us so much, because we were looking at some pretty old British fishing boats, and we've got
Northern Irish fishing boats, please.
They were Northern Irish.
Yes.
Well, okay, we're a part of the same team, I think. So if we go back to what actually took place, it was the British government that used the Common Fisheries Policy to destroy the British fishing fleet. And of course, while we're left with the remains of the British fishing fleet, all of the other European countries were using huge amounts of euros to build brand new vessels that were simply coming and hoovering up the fish. I have seen that, witnessed it myself at sea, doing that job of fisheries protection. So the British government absolutely destroyed the fishing industry in this country, even cutting up the boats and burning them on the beaches so that the European boats, whether they were from Germany, Holland or France or Spain, could come in and hoover up the fish. This is a sop. This is part of Brexit without the exit, to try and take our eyes off the important things. So I'm going to jump straight away from fish to defence. And I'm going to say well done, a very big well done to Veterans for Britain, who are now starting to really tweet out some very important stuff to do this. And not surprisingly, they are giving a lot of credit to MP Andrea Jenkyns, who is a very lone voice in starting to warn about the fact that it's not the creation of a European army that's going on at the moment. But while she talks Brexit, Theresa May has signed and is continuing to sign the whole of the British military infrastructure over to the European Union. Now, some of this has made the press finally. So we've got the Express here, again featuring Andrea Jenkyns. But we've got a mixture of truth and spin, because what is happening is a unified EU military structure, which includes everything: research and development, troops, army, navy. And this is all going to come under one EU umbrella. And Britain is part of that. Theresa May knows it. We've got the situation, no MP will talk about it. So in my opinion, fishing just part of the Brexit smokescreen. But more good news, because finally now we're starting to see very senior retired military officers asking the right questions. And this was Veterans for Britain retweeting a tweet from Roger Lane Nott, former admiral. Why are you happy with this? Giving away our armed forces to the EU. Giving away our armed forces to the EU. Is our independent nuclear deterrent going to remain independent? It does not look like it. And it's a little bit deeper than it doesn't look like it, because Theresa May, David Cameron have already signed over the whole of the infrastructure behind our nuclear deterrent to a joint system with the French. And senior French military officers know this. It's an open secret. So Britain is in partnership with the French. The French are the EU. Theresa May utterly lying. David, I do value the fishing industry, but I think this is so clear that we're just using fishing as a smokescreen. And that is why leave means leave, with that duplicitous man, Mr. Rees-Mogg, and Nigel Farage refused yet again in Torquay to talk about EU military unification. This can't be an accident.
No, now we're an island, right? We're a seafaring nation, we're an island, and islands used to be defined as a piece of land entirely surrounded by the Royal Navy. And the fishing and the shipbuilding and naval industries are obviously very important to us. Now, there's been reports here in The Guardian, fears are mounting that £1 billion contract to build a new fleet of warships so the Royal Navy could go to a Japanese company. So this, again, is UK taxpayers' money. disappearing. The GMB, as you would understand, GMB Union not happy about it. It is vital that we preserve our defence shipbuilding capabilities, right, in order that this order would help secure thousands of jobs. It's a mockery of competition to force UK yards to bid against international competitors who enjoy state subsidies that are being denied to our employers and GMB members. Okay. Now, the decision that this was done on is how you define a warship. And I was just looking at what the definition was, and it's very strange. Definition of a warship. For reasons of national security, all Royal Navy warships defined as destroyers, frigates, and aircraft carriers. So that's all. Will continue to be UK-owned design and will be built and integrated in the UK. Warships built will be via competition between UK shipyards, but international partners will be encouraged to work with UK shipyards and other providers to produce the best possible commercial solution. All other naval ships will be subject to open competition. So all other naval ships are defined as not warships, providing the no national compelling national security reasons. Now that's a choice. That's a choice someone in Whitehall has made to define the ships that way in order to move the orders abroad. Right now, there's a couple of things I could talk long and bitterly about this, but two very quick points. Firstly, we're talking about money, resources taken by coercive taxation for the British population, and the reason given is it's for combined defence, for national defence, so that we as a nation can be secure, right, against other nations like the Germans and the Japanese and the French and all the rest of it. And having coerced that money out of people, we're now sending it offshore to the Germans, the Japanese, and the French to make the warships. It seems strange. And surely it's an area where, given how the money was provided, that it should be used here. But the other thing is, it's the definition is strange and woolly and vague, and has been set that way in order to move that money and those jobs offshore. The question is why.
Yep, thank you for that. And of course, we're bringing in language, and the manipulation of language is now a key part of setting political policy. Just before we move on, we'll put our ad up for the Emergency Defence and Security Briefing, which is Saturday, the 3rd of November, in the Seven Stars Hotel in Totnes. This event absolutely unique because nobody is getting to the heart of what this EU military unification is really about. Once it's fully achieved, we do not exist as a nation state. So if you can come, please do, or please help us by promulgating the details of that really important briefing.
David, we'll need to be a little bit quick on this one if we could, please. But you highlighted this article from The Guardian. The headline is Jaguar Land Rover says about 2,000 staff will go on a 3-day week. And alongside that is another article from Automotive News Europe saying Jaguar Land Rover launches Slovak plant amongst Brexit job fears. Now, there was a particular reason why you were highlighting this. And my question to you is, do you think this is this more than just the typical Brexit scare story noise that we're hearing at the moment? Because you seem to be finding that actually there is a real world implication here.
Well, there's something strange going on, is my point. Jaguar have decided to go on part-time working and to close down plants for bringing forward maintenance. So it's a 2-week closure. And the reason given in the press is there's a reduction in orders from the United States and a reduction in orders or problems with China. Now, the Chinese orders are actually going up about 15%, but that's maybe behind expectations. And the orders from the States and Europe are down slightly. So there doesn't seem to be a huge cataclysm, but we are seeing maybe a reduction compared to where they'd planned to be. Now, you would think with that, lead times on new cars would go down, right? Because if orders are below expectations, your lead time goes down. That would be logical. But no, lead times are doubled. You go to buy a new Jaguar now, you'll have to wait 4 or 5 months to get it. Jaguar dealer in Perth I was speaking to had just spent his day phoning. This is one dealer, one man in one dealership, had to phone 10 customers to say that they weren't going to get their Jaguars when they'd been told that there were going to be another 2 months. So what you're seeing there is something very illogical happening. We're being told orders are down, right? But we're being told we're now in a shortage situation and we're unable to fulfill orders. This is bizarre. So what I'm saying is there's something happening behind the scenes at Jaguar. There's some decision being made, or there's some problem which is on the horizon that the public are not being told about. So if anyone knows anything more about what is happening at Land Rover Jaguar, please let us know.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, let's move on to Jeremy Haywood. Now, Jeremy Haywood sadly has contracted cancer. He's been off work for some time, and I've titled that "Resigns." In fact, he retired on Wednesday, so he announced his retirement because he needs to recover from cancer. He's been in the Cabinet Secretary since 2012, head of the Civil Service since 2014. What has the Prime Minister, Theresa May, done? Well, she has appointed this man, Mark Sedwill, who, as you can see there, is very sad that Jeremy has decided to retire. She has appointed Mark Sedwill to replace Jeremy Haywood. Now, this is very interesting. He has been working in that role on an interim basis while Jeremy Haywood's been away, but he has taken this role permanently with immediate effect. And this is very strange because normally there would be a recruitment procedure. So Theresa May has said more or less this, that recruitment process, we don't have time, Brexit emergency, Khashoggi, these kinds of things. In fact, what she isn't mentioning is fusion doctrine, because what's interesting about Mark Sedwill, of course, is that although he's been made head of the Civil Service, he will remain as Theresa May's National Security Advisor, which means he is chief spook and in charge of the intelligence services and so on. But at the end here, as you see, we have mentioned the fusion doctrine. We've mentioned this before. I just want to remind everybody what this means, what the implications of this, and ask people to think what this means if you have the National Security Advisor, the man in charge of intelligence services, also in charge of the civil service. So the idea of a fusion doctrine was originally put forward in the National Security Capability Review. And what did it have to say? It said the resurgence of state-based threats, intensifying wider state competition, and the erosion of rules-based international order, making it harder to build consensus and tackle global threats. So consensus and global threats. This is, of course, the other sort of keynote of Theresa May recently, the rapid response mechanism. It also said the traditional channels have been largely discarded in favour of digital and social media platforms. This is combined with a decline of trust in traditional sources of information and the era of so-called fake news. Building a culture of common purpose across departments requires improved accountability to shift incentives and behaviours towards a more genuinely whole of government approach. And if you've been watching the UK Column News over the last several months, whole of government approach, we've shown in a whole range of different areas that this is what's going on, a whole of government approach. They go on and say we're taking comprehensive approach to tackling the evil ideology of extremism, whether violent or non-violent, Islamist or far and extreme right wing. I would argue that they're in the process of building an extreme right wing at the moment. This is what they want. This document is highlighting the dangers as far as they're concerned. They say we will establish a new intelligence framework. Mark Sedwill, the perfect man to do that. We will make community engagement a cornerstone of our response to build resilience within communities and reduce public tolerance for criminal activity. So whole of government approach, community engagement, new intelligence framework. This is what it's building up to. National resilience is truly collective, depending on us all. Emergency responders, local and central government, the armed forces, businesses, communities, and individual members of the public. And here we go. We will create a cross-government soft power strategy while respecting the independence of the BBC World Service, British Council, and the many British institutions and brands that contribute to our soft power. and we will significantly expand the National Security Communications team to make communications an integral part of our approach to national security. And of course, we've got a head of counter-disinformation and media development sitting in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, that's Andy Price, that we can't know anything about. We don't know what his terms of reference are. We don't know the size of his team. We're not allowed to know these things. But this is all part of what's going on here. And finally, many capabilities that can contribute to national security lie outside traditional national security departments. So we need stronger partnerships across government with the private and third sectors. So that if you read the full document, what they're talking about is this whole of government approach: intelligence services, government agencies, government departments, the private sector, the public sector, the NGO sector, all working together. Mark Sedwill, the National Security Advisor, now made up to be the head of the Civil Service while he retains that role. Brian, I just see this as being an extremely dangerous situation. And I ask the question, is this a coup?
It is a coup. And you could say it's a soft power coup, because the British government is using the expression our soft power. It's talking about the BBC, it's talking about the British Council. So this is a coup that's happened quietly behind closed doors. The public, most MPs, most backbenchers, totally unaware that Westminster no longer functions, but this unaccountable group of people, this cabal, have done this. And what is this? This essentially is East Germany. We've got the state intermingling, we've got spies amongst people, we've got the government departments. It's the same system that was operated by the Soviets, and it's now operating in this country. But of course, Cameron called it big society. So fusion is the policy, but the ultimate goal is the big society, which will control everything. And of course, it's no accident that Common Purpose is in there, because Common Purpose was the Trojan horse to get people to push this policy, i.e. people to build their own prison. David, you're obviously keen to come in. This is immensely serious.
Well, Common Purpose's poster boy, Sir John Elvidge, obviously introduced this first into Scotland, because we are the testing ground. It was called the Scottish Model of Government, or SMOG for short. And it was well named there because obviously it's toxic, it's choking, and it conceals movement. And when you try to fight it, it's like trying to nail fog to the wall. It's this one government approach is the Stasi state, because it builds in links to all the government-funded charities and all those private sectors with government contracts. So as the government gets very large, they essentially economically dominates the whole of society. And if you want to play any sort of economic game with the government, you have to obey all of their rules. So they're able to introduce through commercial might what they can't introduce through legislation. That's why in Scotland we had taxi drivers being briefed to spy on children in the cab and report to the named person what the children were saying. Because otherwise, no contract with the local education authority, Mr. Cab Driver. That's how it's done. It's creeping, it's insidious, it's fascism. It is East German. You're absolutely right, Brian. It is East German. And you'll get to a point where 1/3 of the population will be reporting to the government.
Right, so of course Mike mentioned that what we are seeing being created by our own government in this country is a right wing. Let's bring in Tommy Robinson. Now I've got a number of headlines here. We'll just quickly scan through them and then we'll bring you back in, David, because I know you're keen to comment on this. We got Sky News: loathsome Tommy Robinson slammed after dining in Parliament. Pretty impressive, isn't it? You come out of prison and put on a smart suit and you're in dining in Parliament. That hasn't happened with Melanie Shaw, but we'll come on to that in a minute. Politics Home here with the headline: watch Commons Speaker's John Bercow in furious tirade at loathsome, obnoxious, repellent Tommy Robinson. And, well, Tommy goes to Congress. It sounds like a new film, doesn't it? Tommy Robinson invited to give address in Washington by members of the US Congress. We've got a bit more here, which is The Independent. Tommy Robinson invited to address US Congress members in Washington by Republican supporters. But if we get into the article, it goes a bit deeper because it says the Middle East Forum, an American think tank that has been funding pro-Robinson protests in Britain, said it has invited Robinson for a 2-day trip to Washington alongside the right-wing David Horowitz Freedom Center. If he's permitted to enter the US, Robinson will speak to the Conservative Opportunity Society at the invitation of Republican Representative Paul Gosar and 6 other members of Congress. Now remember, if we're talking the Middle East Forum, we're talking a forum which is extremely supportive of Israel and Israeli foreign policy. The Guardian's got really upset here. They've obviously got enough money to print this article, Mike, and we're using a bit of cartoon. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Try telling that to Tommy Robinson. And I'll end by the fact that Tommy has been back on videos saying that he's going to fight back against the media. So, David, what is this man and what is he up to?
Well, isn't it interesting? Have you ever seen anyone so viciously attacked in the press? I can't actually remember anyone getting quite this sort of treatment. So the Speaker of the House of Commons said he was loathsome, obnoxious, and repellent. That's from someone in Westminster. That's quite significant. I just want to make a few points here of various types. Firstly, I want us to highlight the arrogance of the rulers here. A member of the Scottish National Party took great exception to Tommy Robinson being invited in by UKIP to have lunch in the House of Lords. He said it's entirely correct that members of both houses engage in robust political debate around the parliamentary state. But today we have learned that yesterday the violent racist thug and fraudster known as Stephen Yaxley Lennon or Tommy Robinson was invited onto the estate and wined and dined in the House of Lords. I understand that sometimes we have to engage in views that one might not agree with, but surely the fact that a man who is as guilty as he is, bearing in mind he's got an appeal coming up, so that's quite a statement, as guilty as he is on stirring up racial hatred, organising violent, thuggish crimes around the country, and setting up the EDL and everything that goes with it, crosses a line. And such a person shouldn't be invited to walk amongst us in the parliamentary estate. I just want everything that we know about the crimes against children that have gone on in and around the parliamentary estate. I just want to emphasise the utter hypocrisy of a parliamentarian saying about whatever you think of Tommy Robinson, saying that he is so low as to be dirt under their shoes. He shouldn't even be allowed to walk amongst us. It's just stunning. And this is why he's going to gather support, because he's going to stand up, he's going to say things, and it's going to ring true with people. Now, when they locked him up, they locked him up in 5 hours under extremely dubious circumstances. Now, the appeal court eviscerated the Leeds trial judge and everything that happened in Leeds. I've never seen an appeal court finding so damning. So there was clearly a huge question over injustice. The mainstream press in this country did nothing, and you got people responding. There was a comedian in America wrote a song. That song was sung by Tommy Robinson supporters outside the court, and the song's about how they rule you, right? And they shouldn't rule you this way, and it comes from the heart. So again, I take your point completely about Zionist interests and where the money and what the direction is. I think all of these things need to be questioned. But the people who are out there supporting him are singing from the heart that we should not be ruled this way. And indeed, we should not. And just final point, the Guardian piece that you showed there is the nastiest piece of journalism I've ever seen. If you want to see vitriol in journalistic form, just read it. We won't have time for me to quote it, but it's just horrible on a nasty personal level. Now, having said all of that, where's this going? Because Tommy Robinson is now saying he's going to fight back, but fighting back, he's got some money that's been donated to him by supporters. He's going to use it for suing journalists and trying to stop them attacking him in this way in the press. That's not going to work, because he's going to the system, the legal system, that has so let not just him down, but all the people he's talking about. It's persecuted Melanie Shaw. It's let down all of the people who were victims of the grooming gangs all across England and Scotland. And he's going to that system and he's going to say, well, I've now got some cash. I'm going to play and I'm going to get fair treatment. He's not. This is delusional. This is making a very serious, fundamental strategic mistake about what we're trying to do and what we're fighting. So my question is not, is he genuine? I know he's not a racist, right? I know he's not far right. I know he's none of the things that the press are talking about. But the question is, what is he and how well advised is he and where's it going? I have big concerns about it.
Okay, well, I'm just going to bring in the thing which I find really, I'm going to use the word offensive, and that is it's been very clear over recent months that Tommy Robinson has cynically hijacked the Melanie Shaw campaign, and he's bandying the posters around, but he's never asking the questions. Who is this woman? What has happened to her? What has happened to other of these abuse victims? He has just pinned Melanie Shaw against himself, and he is clearly using this to big up his own ego. At the moment, there is no contact on the subject of Melanie Shaw at all. It's simply using her picture to help big up his political rallies. And I'm going to be come back a little bit tougher, I think, because at the end of the day, it isn't Tommy Robinson's supporters who are paying for what he's doing. It is a highly pro-Zionist organisation which has already got connections into the American political scene, and I've no doubt the same is going on here. So a lot of questions about Tommy Robinson. And I think we need to get to the bottom of some of those questions, particularly quickly, because at the moment he is being used or is deliberately helping the fusion doctrine, which Mike's talking about.
Let's quick advertisement for Democracy in Chains. This is AV 9.1, Ian Crane's Alternative View event, which is taking place in the Crown Plaza Hotel in London on December the 2nd. 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Tickets are available at alternativeview.co.uk. Brian will be speaking at that, as will Dr. Graham Downing, Patrick Henningsen, Alex Thompson, and Ian R. Crane.
And it will be an excellent event. We'll also say not to be missed is this spotlight on HPV vaccine, Sunday the 11th of November. It will be at a venue in W11 London. Details will be released closer to the event. Christina England has put a huge amount of effort into putting up this event. So if you can attend, please do. It's a topic which is going to affect all of our families in future years.
Right. Well, David, Scotland, and what a headline from the Evening Times in Glasgow. Scots Tory MSP Michelle Ballantyne. People on benefits cannot have as many children as they like. Yes.
Well, okay. So what she said was, this was a debate about welfare, right? And the government, the Conservative government's cap on tax credits to people based on the number of children they've got. So it's capped at 2 children, and there's some exceptions. So she's defending this. She said the 2-child limit is about fairness. It is fair that people on benefit cannot have as many children as they like, while people at work and pay their way and don't claim benefits have to make decisions about the number of children they can have. Universal credit may have its flaws, but the thinking behind the system is sound. Now, obviously, this because it was quite poorly worded. She got a response from Aileen also Campbell, who looked like a 10-year-old girl who'd just been told that Boyzone had broken up or something, and looked quite shocked and in a strange way. And there was a major attack on this woman for saying what she said. The BBC did a phone-in the next day on this subject and was amazed, and you could hear the surprise in the BBC presenter's voice, how many people were phoning in and writing in and texting in supporting this view. Now, the issue here is that there is obviously a major problem with the benefit system. It's a major problem that the Tories are unable to tackle because they can't get at the fundamentals of the system, because they accept all of the fundamental principles that have been established of the system. Despite all the harm it's doing, their view is we will run it better, right? And this is not credible, right? They say that she said that the thinking behind the system is sound. No, the thinking behind the system is not sound. Against that, you've got the virtue signalling from the various authoritarian leftists who want to use the poor. And just before we leave this, the system was explained to me really quite well. The principle is trough and ladle. So imagine you have a huge trough of beans, right? And you get all the professional people in, and you give them each a ladle, and they ladle out the beans onto their plates, and they take that away. You then get the poor in, right, and you give them each a teaspoon, and the little bits in the corners of the trough where you can't get the ladle in, that's what the poor get. That's the system that we're running. It's not achieving what it's setting out to achieve. It's achieving many, many toxic things for the most vulnerable in society, but there isn't a political party who will address this. So we have these strange otherworldly debates with lots of virtue signalling, and it becomes a bit of a pantomime.
Yes, indeed. Right now, just very quickly on this one, I'm afraid, David, this is about Scottish education. I'm failing them, a guidance teacher's world.
Yes, this is from a dear Madam President. This is a series of letters that are written in on the subject of Scottish education. I advise people to look this out. There's a lot of excellent information there. It's been written to Mr. Swinney, and this woman here defines what she as a guidance teacher is being asked to do. She's been asked to look after the following: bullies, both victims and aggressors, self-harm, anxiety, depression, suicide, sexting, LBGT issues, workload issues with teachers, issues with friends, bereavement, both family and pets, sexual assault and rape, separation and divorce, sensory support, mobility issues, ADHD, etc., college enrollment, job references, substance misuse, attendance, punctuality, dyslexia, dyspraxia, pregnancy, both wanted and unwanted, ASD, eating disorders, English as an additional language, and a recognised first point of contact for parents. She's doing that every week for 250 pupils. So we've said to this poor woman, all of the problems of society, you sort them. It's undoable.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we're going to end largely on the subject of ICSA, the Child Abuse Inquiry, but we just flag up that today Mr. Charles Howson is putting an appeal in for his sentence. This was the gentleman in Plymouth who was found guilty a little while ago of sexual assault on young men. But there is an appeal today in London. Remarkably, it's only Plymouth's local newspaper that seems to be reporting this at all. So unlike Mr. Green, who is everywhere, this is almost nowhere. But we'll wait and see what the result of that is. Of course, the big issue is this, ICSA, and for those who haven't been following it, it is videoed every day, although that video then disappears. So while you can watch it live, that's the last time you'll be watching it live unless you capture the video itself. But this is Patrick Sadd, who has been leading most of the evidence put forward to the inquiry. Well, what have we got? Very important, Mickey Summers' evidence has been coming forward today, and we have to wait to the end of the day so that we can see exactly what's been said and how that's been received.
Now, for people that don't know, Mickey Summers is another abuse victim in the Nottinghamshire area related to the same type of abuse that Melanie Shaw experienced.
That's correct, and we also have to say, of course, it's Mickey Summers who's put a tremendous amount of effort in with other people in order to get his own and other evidence from abuse survivors in front of that inquiry. So his evidence was going in this morning, and we'll be able to report on that next week. But this is some of the incredible stuff that's actually come forward. The significance is only really appearing, but here's the Beechwood Suspect Collusion Report. This is an intelligence analysis by Nottingham Police, where it says that they are looking into the Beechwood Children's Home to see whether there was any collusion. The purpose of this report is to try and identify whether any collusion took place between suspects carrying out sexual abuse against children while working at Beechwood as members of staff during its period of use, and whether any collusion can be considered to be a paedophile ring. So whilst we were in court when a judge said that Operation Daybreak was a conspiracy theory, in fact here is Nottingham Police actually looking into the possibilities of child abuse. This lady gave testimony yesterday, Nottingham Corporate Director Safeguarding Children and Adults. Of course, she was sworn in. She said she'd absolutely tell the truth. And it was fascinating then to hear her say that the council does not keep a central record of abuse notifications, but there would be a detailed record of abuse cases on the children's own file. So you don't keep a central record, so you know how many cases. You simply record the abuse on the children's file. And then we can tell our audience today it's remarkable that we know these records, children's records, were disappearing. And Nottingham Police, in their own Beechwood suspect collusion report, admitting this again, because it says, these are the logbooks maintained by the staff at the time to record staffing and events during shifts. But it says many of these records have already disappeared, are missing. So in particular, the Beechwood day logs covering the 1st of the 9th, 76 to the 26th of the 2nd, 1982, and the 13th of 11th, 1990 to the 17th of June, 1994 are missing. So that's very convenient. You record it on the children's records and then the children's records go missing. So we've noted this sort of thing going on. Well, of course, Melanie and other abuse survivors have been rejected by Baroness J herself. The inquiry legal team have asked numerous leading questions of authority witnesses. You have to listen to what's going on yourself, but you will hear these leading questions. Senior police officers have been able to sit and hear their juniors give testimony before giving their own. That's very convenient. The senior people coming in after they've already heard their juniors give their testimony. The inquiry council has read out witness statements rather than their own defence legal teams. This seems to be rather odd. Verbal testimony is being closed down by saying, well, this is all very well, but we need to get this in writing. And that introduces delay. And of course, people are not seeing what's put in writing. And this one I thought was tremendous. Former staff members of Beechwood are now giving evidence as authority employees, but this is not declared. What do I think this is? I think this is a not very well crafted cover-up, and I think the balance between evidence that Melanie Shaw and others have given, including of course Mickey Summers and his team, against now what we're seeing the police and the local authorities say, there's gaping holes.
30 seconds, David, to close.
These cover-ups have a certain threshold to reach. They must be credible. Otherwise, there's no point. I think what we're now seeing is a lot of things which are meant to be credible are no longer being seen as such by the public. I think the ICSA abuse inquiry and Lady Smith's inquiry in Scotland are no longer being seen as credible. Certainly ICSA, which is the more blatant of the two.
Yeah.
And neither has the BBC been seen as credible. And this is very significant because they need to control what people think, what people discuss, and as that goes, then the world is changing.
So there you have it, the BBC not credible. I totally agree with you, David, but of course we've already heard in this news from Mike that the BBC a key part of the British government's soft power. So we'll leave people to think about that. Finally, can we say thank you very much to people who are subscribing to the UK column. It is apparent that a large number of people follow the UK column and watch our news broadcasts, but they do so on a free subscription. And I think it's time for us to say very, very nicely, if you value what we do, please subscribe, because we do need that financial support to keep going. And perhaps we've had a little glimpse into 2019, and we know that some of our baseline costs are going to increase. That's happening to people across the country in all sorts of ways. So if you value what we do, what we report, please consider taking out that subscription. David, thanks very much. We will be back at the same time on Monday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.